Hello and welcome back. I have been working rather hard on my fucking infrastructure, and as it would happen, I went on and rambled about technology for a little bit too long in the last episode. Now that'll continue because if there's one thing which I hate, it's well, for one, I hate like the reflexive contrarian stuff I've seen in the internet do, but that's the internet, right? But if there's one thing I truly like hate, it's just kind of the stupid silly arguments that I can't be asked, like I can't be bothered to really disprove. But if I don't disprove it, who will? So like in the last episode, I ranted a lot about like just when I get like the really silly comments and I got dramatically off track. Specifically, like what I was commenting about was there was this idea that like that like a YouTuber made, right? Which I don't think is completely incorrect, but I feel like is missing the point. And the idea was that basically it's like, you know, in theory, had the N64 released sooner, you know, before the PlayStation, that people would have gotten, like developers specifically, right, would have gotten a lot more used to the concept of the cartridge. And so then when the PS1 arrived, it later, more powerful, in either scenario, regardless of if, regardless of if we're talking a situation where the N64 came out earlier or where the PS1 came out later, either way, either the N64 is going to be weaker or the PS1 is going to be stronger, so you're left with the exact same problem in both cases. But either or, you're still sitting with a situation where the N64 is getting kind of the shitty end of the stick, because the PS1 is faster, and it uses CDs. In the situation where the N64 came out sooner, you're in a shitty situation, partially because the N64 is just a lot slower on paper, even though, like, the PS1 is the same power here, and the N64 could, for the time, have some more advanced features, especially if it came out in, like, 93 versus 94, right? But if the PS1 came out later, who's to say the GPU doesn't match most of the N64 GPU features in terms of, like, you know, non-warping textures, like a Z buffer, that sort of stuff, right? And then who's to say that the fucking PS1 doesn't also completely outcompete the N64 in terms of performance, because it comes out later. And the big thing with it coming out later isn't just new technology coming out, but more importantly, arguably, that the old tech becomes cheaper. So, like, stuff that was previously off-limits to the hardware designers of the PS1, because they were working on a, like, 1994 release, if it's released later, what if they could actually add it? You know? Isn't that even worse for the N64? At the end of the day, like, it's very much a fanboy versus fanboy argument, where both people are arguing over, like, hypotheticals that don't really matter much. And while arguing over the hypothetical situations and trying to, like, brainstorm ways that maybe things could work out differently is interesting, it's not interesting when the goal it serves is a completely separate argument of whose system would end up being better. Or, like, who would or I guess in this case, right, like, would this mean that now people would respect the N64 cartridge more because they just had more time to learn it? And only then would the fucking PS1 arrive. But the issue is, right, in the situation where the PS1 arrives late, that doesn't mean that the entirety of the fucking compact disc industry, let's call it that, doesn't develop. Like, you know, on PC? And what about the Sega Saturn? Like, at the time, right? Honestly, yeah, like fucking, what if this is the situation where the Sega Saturn becomes, you know, the true victor? I don't fucking know. Let's assume the Saturn comes out later as well for the sake of argument, right? Like, who's to say that any of this actually gives the like, the N64 the win? Especially if PCs were also going to be using discs, unless you're going to argue that in a situation where the compact disc didn't develop in time, cartridges would have had a longer time to be used. Yeah. And then everybody would have fucking switched to CDs. It's kind of like how, if you've actually chatted with people who owned these systems back in the day, nobody actually gave a shit about the loading times. I mean, they were brought up on the fucking school playground or internet forums when you were, like, in a hardcore gamer debate. But they weren't things people actually gave a shit about. Nobody was like, oh, I really wish I could enjoy this game, but the load times are unbearable. Of course, yeah, sure, I'm pretty sure there were, like, a couple PS1 games of horrific loading times. Same with Quake 64 on the N64, which loads slower than the Saturn version, but yeah, like, I don't think it's fair to bring up, like, Quake 64 or, whatever PlayStation game has terrible loading times, like the fucking Squaresoft PS1 ports, right? Because, like, if we're gonna end up going down, like, this route of, like, well, what is the worst example of, a game on your system to use as, like, a straw man of this is what gaming on your system is like, then we're just gonna devolve into, like, the N64 fan trying to claim, oh yeah, you know those terrible, like, shovelware games, fucking Elmo's Letter Adventure? Yeah, that's what all PS4 games are like. Sorry, that's what all PS1 games are like. And then the N64 fan would be like, heh. No, wait, I did this the wrong way around. Like, the N64 fan would be like, heh. You know Elmo's Letter Adventure? That's what all PlayStation games are like. And the PlayStation fan will be like, hey, you know Elmo's Letter Adventure? That's what all the N64 games are like. When in reality, both games had... What is this? Both games had, like, shitty shovelware games. I just brought up a game that's on both systems. And it's better on the Sega Saturn. Because it didn't come out on it. Well, this tase me. No. That's good. And, like, that's kind of the thing, right? That's the thing! Okay, so for this one, I'm gonna have to, again... Yeah. Like, the N64 just had some shitty games, and the PS1 had some shitty games. But shitty game versus shitty game, that isn't very, like, that isn't a very good way to measure the systems. I mean, it is fun to see how bad the actual bad games were on a system. Like, what is the lowest of low? But, like, the issue is, you're always gonna find games that suck. So it's not a good argument. And you're always gonna find more games that suck on a system which sold more, because it's selling more means that more people made games for it, probably. Like, that's why if the Wii was a system which nobody gave a shit about, it wouldn't have all the shovelware. The reason why the Wii is full of shovelware is because people cared about it enough to buy games for it. Although, funnily enough, I feel like the Wii is a special case where so much of the library is shovelware, and the only other, like, comparable example would be, like, the PS2. But even then, I feel like the Wii is the only system which has such a colossal amount of shovelware compared to the good games in its library. Where, like, even something like the PS2 has so many incredible games on it, and shovelware. It's sort of a shame, because, again, like, the Wii also has a bunch of great games, it's just that, like, there's a lot more shovelware. Then again, how many shovelware games are on PC? So, like, I don't know how good of an argument that is. But yeah, it's very much one of those things to me where, like, if you want to compare the two systems, you should probably use the best examples of what developers were able to do. And in that case, again, the PS1 just kind of wins, because, like, it's kind of like the question of quantity and quality, where I don't think, like, again, it's worthwhile to discuss which game is technically better. Like, okay, well, this one has a 97 on Metacritic, but this other one has a 98. No. That's not how it works, because here's the thing, right? And this is something only real gamers know this. So whenever you have, like, a really good system, the games on it are really good, right? But it's never one killer app, right? The Nintendo Wii wasn't... Okay, maybe the Wii isn't a good example. The fucking Nintendo Switch isn't a beloved system because it has Mario Odyssey. It's not a beloved system because it has Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. It's not a beloved system because it has fucking Rabbids, the fucking Rabbids XCOM clone that is shockingly good. You know, it's not because of any of those games individually. It's not because it has Xenoblade. It's not because it has Hyrule Warriors. It's not because it has fucking Splatoon. It's because it has all of them. That's why the Switch is such a beloved system. It's not because of any individual game, but it's because of the sum of all the good games on it that the system is beloved. And also, like, the hardware itself is, for what it was, especially back when it came out, like, attractive. But, like, you know, that's what I mean. The system is just fun for people. And that's kind of the problem with something like, you know, when we talk about the PS1 and N64, right? Like, and this happens with, like, also the PS1, sorry, the PS2 and GameCube, to a even larger degree, I guess, where, like, you obviously can't say, oh yeah, the N64 had no good games, unless you're being, like, purposefully inflammatory, right? But, like, it really didn't have that much on it to begin with. And, like, I know you can list off a couple games that were good. The issue is that the PS1 guy can list off more. And so every single time, the argument derails to, this PS1 game is good. Yeah, but this N64 game was better. Yeah, but there's also this other PS1 game that was really good. Yeah, but this same N64 game is even better. And it's just a cycle of one person continuously bringing up new games that are good, and the other person repeating the exact same game, which is good. The game they're bringing up is good, but, like, you know, at some point, you gotta realize, especially if you're, like, not a child, a system needs more than just, like, a couple quote-unquote good games, especially, you know, once you are able to choose to buy games yourself. And the issue is, you know, with the N64, just didn't have that much good stuff on it. It had some, but not much. And granted, some of the games on it were really good. That's the issue. There weren't that many of them. It was very much a Wii U sort of situation, where the hardware itself was kind of miserable to work with, the controllers sucked. However, the difference is between the Wii U and the fucking N64 is that the developers put up with it. Because the alternatives weren't as clearly laid out, and Nintendo had a lot more sway. It is honestly remarkably funny, though, how, like, even so, the N64 still has, like, kind of more stuff worth coming back to in a way. And that's not, like, me praising it, that's how fucking terrible the Wii U was. And, something I do really find kind of funny is, because online now, a lot of the people who had, like, the Wii U as kids, thankfully, me notwithstanding, because I never owned one, I know a guy who owns it. He doesn't like it very much. But yeah, like, the thing is, the, like, whole thing with the fucking Wii U is that all of its good games were ported to Switch anyways. And what's funny is that some of those games outsold the Wii U one of them specifically several times over, because the games themselves were never the issue. It was always the console. And that's kind of the funny thing, you know? If it wasn't the Wii U, if it was the fucking... if they were released on the fucking Wii, sure, they wouldn't have looked as good, but honestly, they would have probably been a lot more impactful. And then, like, you know, oh, but the Wii U had Splatoon in, like, what, 2015? And then they really quickly, like, rebuilt what was once Splatoon 1 into Splatoon 2, so they could have a game on Switch. And then, like, you know, it is kind of funny, where, like, people were genuinely paranoid if fucking Smash Bros. Was just gonna be a Wii U port, because so many games that were previously on Wii U were getting Switch ports at the time, and nobody knew if, like, the next game was actually gonna be a unique game or just a port. Because Nintendo realized, wait, we should re-release our games on a system people are actually buying, which was a great choice. I know there are, like, some Wii U fanatics who don't like the re-releases, because it, like, lowers the value of the Wii U when now the newfangled Switch can just play all of your, like, key titles. But, like... oh, quiet. Okay, I don't care. Like, the issue of that, of course, is, yeah, boo-hoo. Your system, that sucks, doesn't have the exclusives that make people want to touch it. And now that it doesn't have any more exclusives, people won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, it has some exclusives, like... fucking Woolly World. But yeah, not many. I mean, yeah. What were the other exclusives? Like, fucking, I guess Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, and, oh, my favorite! Sonic Lost World! Haha, who gives a shit? Also, I think Sonic Boom... yeah, it is kind of funny how the Sega priced that one at $40, and, it was from... I only recently learned this. It was like a shitty beat-em-up. What I find really funny, though, is, like, with Sonic Boom specifically, there was at least one review guy who didn't hate the game. And, like, because, like, there's this one site where it geo-blocks me, so I have to use a VPN to access it. And the guy is just called the Video Game Critic. So surely his opinions hold a lot of value. And he just has, like, this very quantity over quality approach to his reviews. And he gave Sonic Boom, like, a higher score than quite a few other games. I think he likes it more than Metal Gear Solid, I'm not sure. But he gave it, like, a C-. And he gave a bunch of Atari 5200 games higher scores than Metal Gear Solid 2. Yeah, no. He liked Metal Gear Solid 1. He didn't like 2 and 3. Because he didn't like how the games were cinematic. He also didn't like Gran Turismo 3 and 4 because he found the realism boring. And there is something to be said about, like, the quote-unquote older gamer who has, like, these really funny bad takes. And like, I thought about... I got through a decent chunk of a script trying to, like, distill two kinds of retro gaming YouTubers. Into, like, I called them Jimmy64, and because there were, like, two of the channels, right? One of them was gonna be, like, a parody of Nathaniel Bandy. Like, just kind of amalgamating all the mistakes, like, both explicit and implicit ones that these, like, kinds of YouTubers would make. And one of them was gonna be, like, a clone of Nathaniel Bandy called Jimmy64. Jimmy just because, like, you know, I wanted generic fucking names that sounded remarkably like they could be millennials. So, like, a sort of later millennial that is very clearly an N64 fan. And the whole gimmick with Jimmy is that any incorrect information he says is something that is basically accidental. Jimmy doesn't mean to say stupid shit. Jimmy just sometimes says stupid shit. Because to Jimmy, this is his little hobby, and he obviously doesn't see it as that big of a deal if he gets a few, like, points wrong when talking about video games. Because the video games, who cares? I care. I care, Jimmy. And it's just like, a sort of way to poke fun at the earlier era of YouTube, where, like, this kind of behavior was more common. Where, like, you know, the mistakes Jimmy would make that would end up kind of, like, convincing people of stupid stuff would be stuff like talking about the video game crash like it was a global thing, because in, like, the English-speaking American side of the internet, that's something which a lot of people talked about, and so for a lot of the time, people just kind of assumed that it was global, especially if they were younger and didn't know it was an American exclusive thing. You know, that kind of stuff. What's funny is the second one was, I didn't know what to name him, so I picked, like, I knew that I wanted to call him 8-bit something. Because I wanted to have, like, the kind of guy who calls himself, like, 8-bit X, you know, enter username. And the whole joke of the username was that, like, he was called 8-bit name, and then he doesn't actually play that many... Like, he doesn't actually play that many 8-bit games. He would mostly cover 64-bit games. That was the joke. Because, like, you know, he just calls it, and he would, like, also talk about modern games. 21. Okay, so if it's 21, then I'll go to, like... Wait, if it's 21, then every 7 blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, I'll put it like this here, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, well, it's good enough. Like, the whole point of, like, Jimmy is that he would do it unintentionally. But the other guy would do it a bit more intentionally. And what's funny is I ended up calling him... I think it was, like, 8-bit Nick? I picked another name, and then my friend reminded me, hey, wait a minute, isn't that the name of that, like, internet grifter chud who complains about women on the internet? And I checked, and shockingly, yes, it was. I made a very generic name, and it turns out the name was shockingly already being used. So I really quickly had to change my... I had to change, like, the made-up username, which I find remarkably funny. 31, there's no clean way to do this, so I'll do it every 10 blocks. So, 39, I'll go to 29, then I'll go to 19, and then I'll go to 9, yeah. Good enough. But yeah, it's kind of funny, because I remember I was thinking, wait, why did I think of that name? And there was just, like, a random video from before the guy even became a grifter. Like, right before the guy got into, like, you know, politics grifts. Where some other YouTuber was making a video, it was Jason Graves, I believe, where he just tried to rank all the retro gaming channels on YouTube that he knew of. And I'm pretty sure the video was before I could technically be called a retro gaming channel, in the sense that I wasn't important enough TM. Maybe now I would be included, probably not. But, the thing was that he already gave him, like... I think he gave him his own tier, or whatever, that was, like, below all the other ones. Because before he was a grifter, all he did was, like, topical news stuff regarding the video games. And it wasn't anything that exciting. And then obviously, you know, topical news views are dropping. Quickly, get into the grift! That's how you make money. Of course, I would never become a fucking grifter. That's cringe. Because this is my hobby, and not my livelihood. Obviously, like, you can understand from the perspective of, like, what if he's gonna go broke otherwise? He has to either, you know, he has to either become the chud or go broke. Which, I mean, at that point, you should probably reconsider some of your career choices. If you're stuck between, hating women on the internet, or you know, just yeah, maybe because like that's the thing, right? If you are like gonna have like a YouTube channel, the lowest effort thing that you can do is grift, because at that point, like if you want to clone somebody like Scott the Woz, you know, if you want to clone Scott the Woz and have your own little game review, like quirky game review channel, you have to actually have charisma, you have to know how to do the comedic timing, you have to have a lot of stuff. However, if you want to be like a chud channel, all you need to do... Well, see, I'm gonna... Yeah. Like, all you need to do is yell into the camera about how angry you are that the new video game has the woman. I wonder how they feel about Splatoon Raiders now. That's gonna be funny to see. But, like, that's the thing, right? Shit, I forgot all the stone that was back there. Oh, well, yeah, no, I'll need the stone. And that's the funny thing to me, right? Like, you have all the things, right? All the, like, brains. Like, you have so many people who'll fall for the grift. These people don't actually care about this sort of stuff. I mean, okay, some of them do. And that's even sadder. Right? What I feel like, because, like, the thing for a lot of these kinds of guys is they may already be chuds. By the way, for those who don't know about the term, because I've been using it for quite a bit. Okay, so chud comes from a 1984 horror film called Chud. And what it means is cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller. And in online discussions, though it obviously has been rather diluted in the like last year or so because people didn't understand what it was used for, and it started being basically for years it was used in a specifically political context to denote the kinds of unwashed individuals you would not want to be near, and you would not want to have your daughter be near, and that's like that's the chud. You know? Someone who will, like, come out from a sewer grate and pull you down into the sewer to eat you. And, the thing is, some people, from some of these grifters, it's always, like, a similar-ish story where, like, some of them are genuinely hateful people. Some of them, like, don't give a shit and just want to do that for money. But the continuous thing that you'll see all the time is that a lot of the time, at least, they're going to drum up, like, they're gonna make, like, a huge fuss on something that they don't actually give a shit about, because that's always the thing. They don't actually care about any of the games they pretend to be mad about. Well, you think that these people actually care that, like, you can play as a woman in a video game? Of course not. They're just drumming it up because that's what their audience wants to see. They want someone to tell them that it's okay to be mad that the new God of War is gonna have the woman in it. Because that's... why am I digging through this? I'm fucking... You know, that's what they want. And... at the end of the day, like, that's it. That's what they want. They just want people to listen to them yell because they know that there are people who just want to be mad at something. And it's basically rage bait, and it works. People fall for it. People genuinely think that, like, you know, this is something worth even, you know, arguing about on the internet, being mad about, whatever. Like, people will genuinely be angry about this sort of stuff. I've seen people, like, become... It's like... There was this one, like, green text that's shared around in left circles making fun of, like, this kind of behavior. Oh yeah, by the way, incredible feature that I found in the settings menu really quickly. Ta-da! I don't know if I'll use it or not, but I want to use it for a little bit. But yeah, like, it's like a green text where somebody's like on a date. Finally, you know? Chud goes on a date. And he like the woman asks him about like his politics, and he tries to give the most, in his mind, normie political takes that he could imagine, and the girl is already like, you know, like, oh god, you're not like an alt-righter, are you? Because like in also, is this spreading or am I going crazy? Like, because, you know, in his mind, he's just saying normal things, right? But he is so far disconnected from what, like, real people should care about and from what real people think, that he thinks that the insanity is actually normal. And of course, the joke is that, like, you know, what he thinks is normal is actually, you know, so far away from what actually is normal that he basically sabotages himself in this regard. He is so far removed from, like, what people outside think about that he can only, like, you know, he'll say something which he thinks is normal, only to be stared at in bewilderment because he believes in crazy bullshit. And that's the whole story, you know? That's what happens all the time when I've seen it. I mean, not all the time, but it happens, especially in, like, the more normie servers, right? You'll have someone come in, they'll say something completely, like, out of pocket, something completely fucking insane, and then they're gonna be, like, confused as to why people are fucking bewildered, and why people are looking at them like they just shat themselves. It's like, you know, no, ew, what the fuck, what are you talking about? You know, you can't say that. What's wrong with you? And they're gonna always act like, heh. Oh, new stone? Gloomstone, huh? The old world? What biome is this? But yeah, it's one of those things, right? Where people will be so in their, like, little political bubble that, they just don't know. They sound completely insane to the people outside of it. And, like, the thing is, like, I've seen a lot of people who are, like, lefties and have the exact same sort of problem. But, like, at least with, like, you know, when you have, like, somebody who, like, you know, is this or that, right? At least when they're a lefty, they'll say things that are, like, super critical of, like, corporations or whatever. And people, like, look at them because, like, you know, in a normie context, you know, being hypercritical and anti-corporation is, like, kind of accepted but weird. But being a chud obviously isn't. Especially, like, you know, these days, you know, times are changing. People are becoming more openly, like, anti-corporate. And, like, you know, if somebody is, like, from a lefty perspective, giving, like, clear criticisms of, like, the owner class, and, you know, that's obviously gonna sound kind of, again, out of pocket, but it's gonna obviously be a lot more acceptable than, like, I don't fucking know, anti-Semitism. Because very obviously and very clearly, like, one of these things is mentally insane, so people don't like it, and the other one is just, like, you know, people don't like being reminded they live under capitalism. And it is kind of funny how, like, you know, you kind of look back at it, you know, when you were younger. This is something that everybody kind of knows. It's like, you know, it feels like times were so different, because at least for me, I can remember those days where, like, consumerism still felt cool. And, like, because there was this, especially in the 2000s, right, and, like, the 90s or whatever, right, there was still, and even up to the 2010s, there was this belief that, like, technology is gonna be the future, we're going to tech our way out of this, it's all gonna be new and dandy and fun and fine, and then... nothing. And back then, like, consumerism felt cool in a way, because there was no great financial crash, you know? And, the entire fucking global economy didn't get hyper-financialized yet, so people didn't fucking... Because, you know, that's the whole, like, rot that people experience with, like, life today. Where back in the day, because of the way things worked, things weren't necessarily more efficient. However, like, these days, everything has kind of been in, like, you know, especially in, like, the West, all governments are trying to do austerity, no matter for, like, you know, all the major parties, at least, are trying to do austerity, no matter what they say, the true politics are austerity. And, like, more and more services are being cut, things seem to get worse and worse, and then, like, you start realizing, you know, wait a minute. You've been telling me for the last God knows how many years that GDP has been going up. And my life hasn't gotten anything better. If anything, it's gotten worse. So, what's happening? And this is where my, like, final conspiracy comes around, where the conspiracy is really simple. I believe that a lot of these chuds are actually, like, paid for by, like, well, they're called dark money groups, but really it's, like, the same lobbyists who fund politicians, right? In, like, a lot of the world where bribery is for some reason legal and rebranded to lobbying. Where basically, like, you know, because why would you know, there's this whole thing for, like, small fish on YouTube, but, like, surely nobody cares about this sort of stuff, really. And then you realize, well, wait a minute. Like, you have, for instance, I think J.K. Rowling is a clear example of somebody who has a lot of money and who is bankrolling, like, far-right causes all across the UK. You had Elon Musk doing the same all across Europe. Now, like, it's blatant because less stable people with no filter are now the ones loudly pushing it, instead of it kind of being done, you know, behind closed doors. But this has been happening for a while now. And, like, it is my personal belief. Because, like, why else would every single time any kind of, like, this sort of... Because every single time it's like, you know, you have to find a new minority to blame. It's not, you know, because to admit that you are the one who's failed is a weakness. And like, you know, the system can't have that. There needs to always be a scapegoat, because if there's a scapegoat, we can all find someone to blame, and then we can also say that anybody who is pointing out at the problem, like, that is actually real, is also automatically trying to claim that, like, you know... Like, you know, it's when somebody... It's the whole, like, identity politics stuff, right? Which was pushed by, like, specifically, like, identity politics was pushed by the Clinton campaign in the 2016 elections in the US, because Bernie Sanders, and specifically, like, that kind of, like, social democrat left-leaning side of the party, was getting way too strong. So they basically fucking astroturfed a movement of, like, you will not speak over women. And they basically did that and destroyed internet politics forever. And yeah, thanks, Hillary. But that's, like, the thing, right? They were basically... That's basically why they lost. It's because they wanted to destroy Bernie at all costs, because at the end of the day, the Democrats have a lot of the same goals as the Republicans. They're all just serving capital. That's the thing. The only time that this hasn't happened was with Mamdani, because he was a guy on the outside. And then, what happens when Mamdani tries to run? The Democrats were basically, up until the last second, trying to fucking push him down the stairs, because they knew that Mamdani winning is terrible for them, because people like him, and then when he wins, and he did win, now people are turning to the Democrats and asking them, well, Mamdani was really successful and really cool. You know, people clearly don't want a moderate. So why aren't you ever putting out any candidates that aren't just dog shit moderates? and because of Democrats and Republicans. And when I say Democrats and Republicans, imagine I'm saying every single party in the West that is kind of like these two everywhere. That includes Labour, that includes, well, whatever parties there are in France and Germany, etc., etc. They're gonna ask themselves, like, if these left-wing, like, very obviously non-bipartisan politicians are doing so well, why aren't you pushing more of them? And what happens then? Let's play a game of what happens then. Well, it's really simple. Nothing. That's why they're afraid of it. They don't want Mamdani to win. Or I guess they didn't want him to win. Because if he won, and he did, now people want to push further. Because now, Mamdani won. And I mean, it is what happens in the US. Oh yeah, I know this episode's running long, but I want to finish all of this in one episode. And we're gonna be there soon, so it's fine. Like, when Mamdani won, part of the reason for that was definitely because for so long, like, in America, kids were taught that, like, this and that, public healthcare is socialism. Like, having, being able to not starve to death is socialism. And then Mamdani comes around and he's like, I'm a socialist. And then what happens is, oops, it turns out that by trying to, like, make, I'm gonna just do a 10 here, it's fine. Like, by trying to convince people that socialism is scary by calling not scary, right? But by trying to convince people that everything good in the world was socialism, all you really accomplished was then when somebody actually, like, when people are grown up and they hear all of these things get called socialism, now finally that, like, somebody is, now finally that somebody is actually, like, a candidate who, calls themselves a socialist, now they're like, oh shit, people actually want the thing we kept telling them was bad. Oops. And, like, I know that, especially, like, I've probably seen this, like, on this. I'm pretty sure some online lefty guys have argued over Mamdani not being a real socialist, but, like, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what, like, people, like, it doesn't matter if Mamdani's politics align with the tenets of socialism or whatever. What matters is that people think that Mamdani is a socialist. I think I'll... Yeah, I'll do this. Fuck it. Sure, 50-minute episode. What matters is not that, like, Mamdani... if Mamdani is a socialist or not, what matters that people think of him as one. And when people think of him as one, then, whenever somebody discusses Mamdani, they're gonna be like, did you hear that a socialist won New York? And then, like, they look at the news, and, okay, obviously, some of the news is trying to slander him daily, but, like, then you see how much good is happening in New York. And now things are going even worse for the people who were trying to brand him as a socialist, because now, not only is a socialist, leading New York, but he's doing a good job. Meanwhile, in a situation where Mamdani was seen as a more normal candidate, maybe he wouldn't have been able to, pull in as many people as he did now. But because people tried to make him out as this big, scary, extreme guy who was going to break everything, I'm pretty sure some people who voted for him genuinely voted for him because they were like, fuck it. It's either Mamdani or things stay the same. And they saw Mamdani in a similar way that a lot of, like, people who were, like, partaking in revolutions saw, obviously not to the same extent, not to say that voting for Mamdani was a revolutionary act or whatever, but, like, a big sort of thing which would push a revolution forwards would be the idea that people will see that, life as it is right now is going to be, like, you know, if things continue on the same way as they are now, things will get worse than whatever the worst possible outcome could be for me if this other thing that is quote-unquote revolutionary, you know, happens. And, you know, in Mamdani's case, you know, shit, I need more stone. Fuck it, I wanna finish the episode sooner. Where's the portal? Like, you know, uh, it's one of those things where because people believe... Oh my god. Okay, that's annoying. Like, specifically because people believed Mamdani was, like, quote-unquote revolutionary, or whatever. Or I guess because so much stuff was branding him to be this big, scary socialist man, people went into it, and they were like, you know, okay, so what? If this guy's a socialist, it's, you know, it's if people actually bought the propaganda that he was, like, a socialist. Not a propaganda, but, like, if people actually voted for him, then clearly they, you know, they either A, didn't believe the propaganda that, like, the anti-Mamdani people was saying about him being a scary radical, or maybe they thought, and this is what I think is the more likely option, that maybe that was good. Maybe they genuinely thought, okay, you know, the worst thing that could happen from Mamdani winning is still better than what happens if he doesn't win. And that's kind of the thing. I feel like we're gonna see the aftershocks of this soon. Also, yeah, look, I know it's not perfect everywhere, but I'm happy with how I've quickly rebuilt this, and that's gonna be kind of it. I hope things go well for Mamdani. She's giving people free ice cream or whatever at a time where Trump's giving people free diarrhea. And I think that's positive. So, see you next time when we better more adventures. Goodbye.